So Peter, thank you so much for helping me with my project. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have been here in Houston for the last, well, I got down here in 2004, came in from Chicago. And I work with the LaRouche Political Action Committee. I came down here, my wife has been very active in that, and I've been teaching mathematics up until the last couple of years when I retired. And so I was substitute teaching, and then now that with the COVID thing, that's a little questionable. I'm not sure I'm going to go back just because I don't want to be in a mix where I might be infected, because I am 70 and I have some medical issues and I'd rather not catch the disease. So, but otherwise, in my work with the Political Action Committee, ever since I ran into it, which was back in 1973, the focus science has been on fusion, getting to fusion, because it's an unlimited source of energy for us here on Earth. And it's the most powerful mechanism by which we can get to other planets at a reasonable time. And of course, the development of fusion is going to require all kinds of discoveries in various sorts of material science, our understanding of the atomic structure, and all kinds of wonderful things are going to come out of it, already have come out of it. So we'd love to have a lot, more of that. And your presentation today by Ms. Majid, I thought was really incredible for that reason, because what it demonstrated to me is here she is, right next to, in Pakistan, right next to India, and they have this historic, problem, which the British actually created for them. But there's the kind of collaboration that one of your participants today pointed out of these contests going on in Delhi, and was asking if she had been involved in that. And she knew about it, but because of the political divisions, you can't get across the border. But she was very tuned into that idea that if we can operate on this level, that's how you change the world. You make the world a better place, people cooperating with each other. And which of course is what, one of the things we're trying to do right now is get a thing going where President Trump meets with President Putin and President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi. That's what Mrs. LaRouche wants to do. But now that Putin called for a meeting of the Big Five in the UN Security Council, that would be a good place to do it, especially given that Boris Johnson has virtually attacked the City of London by calling up the image of FDR, demanding the kind of New Deal economic growth in England today that would solve a lot of their problems. But that is, of course, against what the Wall Street City of London group wants. So anyway, it's an exciting time to be alive. We have all this stuff going on. So anyway, that's me.
Yeah, it's also, talking about Yumna, it's amazing how difficult it was for her to get the telescope from the airport, from the customs.
I was amazed how, it's like a weapon. It's like when, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he brought up the idea of doing, model rockets. Well, I'm sure they thought of that as weapons. That's got to be it. So, you can't have those coming into Pakistan because, then people would get their hands on weapons, I know our Second our Second Amendment advocates would have a hard time living in Pakistan. But, it's that she is, well, and it really brings up, as what came up from one participant, the gender inequality. It's awful the way she has had to fight just because she's a woman to gain access to knowledge about space, to gain access about something that well, this isn't so prestigious. Why don't you be a doctor? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? But no, she wants to be an astronaut. And the roadblocks are enormous. Now, somehow I have in my mind that she's 32, but she looks younger than that. How old is she? Do you know?
Well, she was born in 1997, so that would make her 22.
22. Okay, 22. Well, now that certainly makes more sense. Well, so the roads are still possibly open, can be open for her to grow. But no,
well, I sure hope they're open for you and me too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, that's a big question, because the legitimate concern about racism in America, and does have a racist culture. It does have a racist culture. But how do you overcome it? And that's what's not even being addressed. You don't overcome it by having better police psychology. Our police forces, unfortunately, have been trained in anti-terrorist tactics. So they're not trained to deal with local communities and their neighbors. They're trained to deal with terrorists, and that's kind of a problem. And so there are things that need to be done and fixed, but the solution, in my mind, is we need the kind of collaboration that the space program represents. That, NASA, JAXA, the Chinese space program, ESA, all these different agencies that exist globally, none of them can function independently. They all need each other's help. It's science, it's technology, it's money, it's, none of it can be done without all of us working together. And if the leaders of the big nations get together, I think there's a possibility that they know that on the healthcare question, right now, the nations of South America, Africa, Asia, those nations are in so much trouble because they don't have a healthcare system. And there was a report that came out the other day that of the nations that, I think it was something like 36 nations or 25 nations in Africa that are facing this COVID devastation of their health situation, they were ordered 3 years ago by the IMF to cut spending by anywhere from 20 to 30% on their social services. So of course that had a dramatic impact on healthcare. And in fact, this was going on back when, do you remember the Ebola crisis back a couple of years ago? Yes. Well, in Liberia, which was heavily attacked because they had been ordered to not fund their healthcare services by the International Monetary Fund, 300 healthcare workers died from the Ebola because they didn't have adequate protective gear. They didn't have adequate staffing, training. And, I've certainly not all of those can be blamed on the IMF, but that's the kind of mentality that we've been dealing with. And if we're actually going to civilize space, I should say colonize space, I don't think there's a whole lot to civilize in the way of other beings out there. But, I was recently reading this book of one of my in-laws recommended. It's called Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. Do I have that name right?
Oh, yes. He does Red Mars.
Green Mars,
Blue Mars, yeah.
Yeah. And the thing that I found very disturbing about the book was that every problem that we have on this planet, cultural, ideological, religious, ethnicity, etc., he's brought it all up to Mars, and it's still operating in the same sort of infantile way that it operates down here. Now, I just can't imagine human beings leaving this planet and not looking at each other for the quality of creative genius that's in their mind, that their mind represents, that quality is not the primary issue in their relationship with the other person. And all the other stuff is nonsense. Because to survive outside our, what do we want? I can't even think, womb, to survive outside of our womb, we have to be very, very rigorous about how we deal with each other and how we deal with the environment we're stuck in. And so if we can't make a cultural leap to when we start colonizing space, I don't think we'll do it. We'll blow each other up on Mars.
Well, I think whenever the Europeans came to North America, there was a certain filter that just the act of having to self-select and to come over to North America created. I mean, these are people who are willing to leave everything they knew behind, looking for a better way to live, willing to do what it takes, didn't expect for anything to be given to them. And they came over here and literally created our world out of the wilderness. And then once they've created that beachhead and created the Hiltons and the what have you, and their children's come along and they have no clue about the cost of those things, then society starts going a different direction. But I think initially, going to Mars, that's going to be a huge filter, and will be for a long time. And Mars is going to be, talk about voluntary simplicity, a life of poverty, in terms of everything that it's going to be a high-tech life of poverty, right? It's going to
Yeah, it is going to be very, very different. And I enjoyed the part of the book I enjoyed was his description of the environment you create to live there. I thought that was very interesting. And but it gets tiresome, the fact that all the interactions are so silly. But your reference to the founders of the country, I think, is really important. I think that because that is what should be on people's minds, because we have to ask ourselves, what are the values of our society? And we talk about value a lot, we use the word a lot, but is free trade a value? That's geopolitical concern a value of society? We have to make sure we're not like those people over there, that kind of thing. Because the forces that actually established the intellectual heritage of our country, they came here because the oligarchical society of Europe refused to allow the creative genius of the individual to develop outside of their control. If they could control it, that's fine. But as soon as it created a circumstance where ingenuity and scientific discovery were producing centers of production that were outside the grip of these oligarchies, they had to figure out ways to shut it down. And in fact, that's why Massachusetts was a real problem, because they had the most advanced iron mill in the world. They were putting out so much steel, not steel, but iron in this plant that was in Massachusetts. I can't remember the name of it, but it was development it wasn't taxes on tea that made Americans angry. What made Americans angry is we weren't allowed to develop the power we had. They kept restricting us so that we couldn't go ahead with the kind of building an industrial society. They just wanted us to produce raw materials so they could sell us their product. And we said no. And we got to go back to that approach, that individuals are important because they can make contributions to society through their creativity, that kind of thing. So I think getting up to Mars is going to be a challenge. If we keep acting the way we are, I don't think we'll ever get there, but because there's idiots that could get us into wars that could become nuclear, which would not leave us in good shape for launches. So
I know. But you're a math teacher in the substitute teacher, so you get to see multiple classes, not just one that you have control
Yeah.
over. I was wondering what your opinion is about the way that creativity and ingenuity and those types of things are either fostered or kind of restricted and repressed inside of our schools, and if you had some insight into that.
Well, I do have, as you can tell, I'm a very opinionated person. And I have some pretty strong opinions. The problem with the school system is that the state legislature has decided that the measure of education is the number of graduates. So if a student doesn't do the work, the teacher has to do something to justify giving him a passing grade. That may mean a lot of extra work, tutoring and that sort of thing. I mean, at one point, it got to the point where I was teaching. I won't mention the school just because it's probably not proper to do that. But where I was teaching, kids that failed for the 6 weeks, they could come and sit in the classroom and, do some, sort of meaningless homework assignment and thereby get a 70. Now, I'm exaggerating it somewhat, but it's that kind of mentality. My attitude was, and still is, if you fail, you fail. Do the homework, do what's asked of you in class, and you won't fail. You might not get straight A's, but you will not fail because you'll learn if you do the work. But you can't do that because then you're going to have a lot of failures, especially the first couple of years. But if we did that, I think that once the word got out that you're not going to get a diploma unless you do the work, then kids would come to school and work. Because the natural inclination for a human being is to want to learn. I mean, that's not imposed on mankind. That is a natural inclination, I think, that man wants to learn. We want to learn. And we love to answer the question why and ask the question why. And of course the curriculum, I think in my experience, in a class of 30, there'd be 5 or 6 kids that could handle the curriculum easily, and you could probably speed it up by 20%, maybe more, and go through. Then you have, that's 5 out of 30. Then you have another, say 15 that, or somewhere 10 and 15, who, if those guys are doing the work and taking some leadership in class, those 5, then the others will follow. They'll do the work, they'll make an effort, but they won't be focused on it in the way the better students are. And then you have the kids that just don't give a damn. And my attitude is split them up. Take the kids that can go fast, put them in a separate class. The kids that'll do the work when they're in the right environment, put them in the right environment, let them do the work. The kids that don't give a damn, put them in a class with maybe, a security officer and a teacher, and tell them, you want to get out of here? Fine, we'll put you in the other class. But if you screw up, you're coming right back here and you won't be able to go back this year. I mean, I just think that we don't hold the students and by extension, the families accountable. And a lot of it is family, oh, you don't need a diploma. Yeah, look at me. I set up my own business and I'm making enough money to buy the house and the car. I'm putting food on your table, but you don't need a high school education. Or, take the same argument against the college education at home, that kind of thing. And when you have that environment, that's very, very hard for students to beat it. So that is an issue. But the real question is making sure that someone comes out of high school with a diploma, they actually know something. In my mind, that's what the issue is. And there's all kinds of pedagogical questions, because if you teach a test I know that the Mr. LaRouche always said, look, the way you have to teach a kid is get them involved in discovering principles. Get them in, put them in an experimental situation. Teach them all they need to know about how something was discovered, but don't teach them exactly how it was discovered. Teach them what the people in that time period or knew. Teach them that and challenge them to figure it out. Now, that is a very different kind of education, you know, and it takes a lot of time, and you have to stop thinking that the amount of education, information is what adds up to an education. You got to get rid of that somehow. So that's the first thing, the organizational thing, that is pretty easy to do if you just have the guts to do it. But the other thing, I don't know if we have any departments of education in this country that, and I'm talking about colleges, that could teach teachers to teach in that way. You know, that would be really revolutionary, I think. And I'd love to see that happen. I'm not sure it can right now. I mean, if we get to the point where, you know, all the spacefaring nations are working together to get up to Mars, then that kind of thing I think can happen, because our economies are going to grow like gangbusters, you know. So now my phone just told me my battery's wearing out. I've got 5% left.
Oh no.
I can plug it in. I have to move to plug it in. I'm going back to my office. I was out in the living room so that I wouldn't bother my wife too much. But okay, there. Now I'm plugged in.
And so when did you find out that NASA is planning to go back to the moon in 2024?
Well, basically as soon as Trump announced it. You know, he said, Bridenstine, when he said we're going back to the moon in 2024, we put out a pamphlet on it. And we were, you know, down at the University of Houston telling students, hey, we're going, We're going to the moon in 2024? I didn't know that. So we already had that. We had it out there. And we went through, you know, in this pamphlet on a moon and going back to the moon and Mars, you know, outlined the discussion that I've sort of sketched over here. So yeah, I've known about it a lot, and I was very upset when, you know, we stopped the Constellation program and the related stuff. Although at least they kept working on the capsule, you know, that was good. But no, I've been trying to tell people about it, and you'd be surprised. Well, you probably wouldn't be surprised, but a lot of people would be surprised how much support there is for the space program in this country. There is people outside, you know, once in a while you'll run into somebody that's, you know, tells you they don't care about it, space. What good is that, you know? But for the most part, especially my generation, I'm 70 years old, you know, we know what NASA did for the country. We saw that. I mean, look what we're doing here. I'm standing in my office holding a little black box, right? Talking to you, who you're probably holding a little black box. And we're seeing each other and talking to each other, and yet we're about 25, 30 miles apart.
Or even earlier, we were talking to somebody in Pakistan.
Yeah, right. And that's all the way around the world. So, I mean, this is this is the, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see that?
Let's see. We commit to the Moon Mars mission, the true spark for changing the culture.
Yeah, that's our pamphlet.
I like it.
So that's what we got out. I don't know. I think we put out about 10,000 of them and got them out. So that's what I've you know, been working on that, and to make that idea spread. And unfortunately, the youth are very pessimistic. When you go on campus, they're not sold on the green ideology, the environmentals. I mean, can you imagine trying to fly from here to Pakistan with a windmill powering your airplane? I mean, they realize that it just can't work. But how do you fight the system? And that's what people miss about President Trump. For whatever you believe about President Trump, the fact that President Trump fought against the wars in the Middle East, etc., said we got to be friends and collaborate with China and Russia, said we have to rebuild American infrastructure. That kind of thinking is what this oligarchy of finance doesn't like. They hate that. And they hate Trump. As the Spectator wrote in January of 2017, when Trump was inaugurated, Trump is going to be assassinated, impeached, or what was the other one? Forced to resign. And then they've been carrying out this insane attack on the presidency for the last 4 years. I mean, it's just, the latest thing is this thing that Russia is paying Afghani soldiers to, not Afghani, but Taliban soldiers to kill Americans. Well, first of all, they've been fighting Americans for 20 years, so it's not a big deal for them to kill Americans. They don't need to be paid. They want to do it. But it's still ridiculous to think that that kind of thing is going on. And then every intelligence agency and our military leadership is saying it's unverified, it's unverified, it's unverified. But our media reports it like it's true. And if you could get your mind around that kind of evil, that kind of corruption, that's why America is so moribund. We're not doing the things we should be doing for developing our own country, our own people, and collaborating with the rest of the world. We're just, like wading through molasses of lies that won't let us act like we want to act. Like I would say, most Americans, if you give them the option, most Americans want to go back to the moon. Most Americans want to work out disagreements with Russia and China. They don't want war. They don't want to spend $1 trillion a year on armaments. And it is really ridiculous. We spend about twice what the entire military budget of the world is on our armaments.
Well, and we do have a culture of violence and war. I mean, if you look at the toys that we have, you often have like guns and that type of thing. If you look at the movies we play, single shooter combat games are a big category of that. And if you look at the movies we watch, it's like Mission Impossible and, these kind of glorifying the warrior culture, the guy that comes in and has the ultimate ability to destroy, is lifted up as being the idealization of what humans should become.
Yeah.
So, there's a huge culture around, we're really big on talking about how to destroy, but not so much on how to create or how to heal.
Yeah. Well, but you got to remember that is all run by a powerful financial elite. All of it. I mean, when I was growing up, we had Ed Sullivan. And Ed Sullivan always had someone, Lena Horne or Enzo Pincia or somebody singing classical music, operatic songs, beautiful stuff. And we had, there was another thing, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It starts with an O. Not Olympus, it's not, anyway, there was some other program that, got you thinking about building a future. And Disney would do it every now and then. I remember watching this program about monorails and, magnetically levitated trains and stuff. And they got us excited about what we could build in the future. But you don't see that today. It's not out there. And that makes it very hard for young people to raise their head up. I mean, you ask an ordinary young person what a human being is, they'll say it's a smart animal. You know, and but
well, that sounds optimistic.
Right. But you know, just then I always whenever I get that response from people, I always tell them, I'll always say, well, can your dog put on a lab coat and cure a disease? You know, do you think a kangaroo could get us to the moon? And because what makes man different is this power of creative discovery, that however we're created, whatever you want to say about the creation of this universe, you know, call it God, creator, you know, whatever you want. But whatever, there's a principle in this universe that created us. And we have this power of thought, which has no weight, no velocity, and it changes the universe. I mean, think of that, you know, Saturn V going to the moon. Well, Wernher von Braun's mind turned that into reality. You know, I mean, it took a lot of help from our Congress, you know, and money and stuff, and lots of engineers and technicians and all kinds of things. But all of those are ideas. And it's ideas that are based on going into the future. Dogs don't think about the future, you know, except when they see you coming home, they start wagging their tail because they're going to get fed. You know, that's about as far into the future as they can see.
But don't you feel like that's what Western society is becoming? We're just a bunch of people looking for handouts.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, our society is very degraded. You know, but the thing I think that the pessimism, the way to overcome the pessimism, because it is pessimistic to just think of man as an animal, is to realize that we are human, and this quality of creativity within us is associated with what St. Paul called agape, which is not love in a sensual, you know, erotic sense, or just friendly familial, you know, feelings, but it's a universal quality of love for mankind. And anyone who makes a contribution which changes the lives of many people for the better, in order to be driven to do that, because you don't make a discovery like that, oh, I just happened to make this discovery yesterday while I was cleaning the sink. You know, it doesn't happen that way. You have to spend years and years thinking and playing around with ideas and experimenting, trying to figure out, is this idea right? Is that idea wrong? And you have to concentrate on it. And so why do that? Well, because you love mankind. You want mankind to benefit from the discovery that you're looking for. Because you know, if we get nuclear fusion, mankind on this planet is going to be a completely different society. We're going to be a different world. And so you've got scientists that are working on it. If we had just been funding it at levels that are actually based on what it costs to do it, we probably could have had it about 20 years ago. But we consistently funded it about 80% below the known line of necessary funding to achieve it. You know, to achieve fusion in 20 years, it'll take this much. Okay, well, to get fusion in 10 years, it'll take this much, right? And we consistently funded it at about 80% below the minimum necessary for getting it. So now, if we can get President Trump to really shift gears in terms of infrastructure, you know, we've got to rebuild our own healthcare system so we can protect ourselves from these viruses and whatnot. We have to work with other nations, especially the poor nations, to help them build health systems they need to defend themselves. And of course, in the process of doing that, it's going to create huge numbers of jobs and whatnot. And then, of course, if we're going to build our country, we need a better transport infrastructure. We got to build high-speed rails. And rebuilding our auto industry around the production of those kinds of trains and train cars is going to have a tremendous effect on our nation's ability to use new technologies, new materials, et cetera, especially when it comes to superconducting magnets and such things. So the potentiality for us, if Trump says, okay, we're going to use American credit to finance American industrial development. If he does that, we can build our way out of this. It'll be tricky, you know, sticky at first and problems, but we could build our way out of it. And that's what I want to see us do, is get us doing that. But this Never Trump gang, I mean, look what's happening. You know, they tore down statues of Frederick Douglass. They're anti-racist and they're tearing down Frederick Douglass. I mean, what are they doing?
How do you explain that?
They're anarchists. You know, an anarchist, a serious anarchist, get rid of what you got and rebuild. And like Trump said at the Mount Rushmore, he said, these people are not trying to make America better, they're trying to destroy it. And I think that's right. They are trying to destroy it. You know, yes, we've made mistakes, we've got problems, but the issue is, how do you make it better? You know, I think we've come a long way. You know, when I was growing up, you know, that's when, you know, Martin Luther King was marching in, you know, Selma and Montgomery. And people were being killed, you know, lynched. When I moved down to Texas, a guy got pulled behind a truck until he was nothing left of him but a trunk.
I know that happened in my, I used to live in Orangefield, so that wasn't too far away from where I lived, actually.
Yeah. So, yeah, we got problems. There's no question about having the problems. But if you can create an environment where people look at each other as potentially creative, productive human beings, then the other stuff falls away. But you have to be able to look in and see a creative, inquisitive, thinking person. That's what makes Rembrandt so great. You know, Vermeer did a wonderful job producing paintings, but you know, there's this guy, if you watch this Tim's Vermeer movie, I don't know if you've ever seen that. He figured out how Vermeer would probably using the latest discoveries of optics and mirrors to be able to exactly match colors of his subjects, of the subjects of his painting. So that, I mean, he could get nuances in light that are so video-like that he couldn't believe it, this guy, Tim. And so he had a lot of money. So he went out and tried and figured out how to do it. And he produced his own Vermeer paintings using his method. And it worked pretty well. But Rembrandt, he knew how to paint the light that's in the soul. You know, and that's what great art does. Great art shows you the beauty of the human soul in some form. And that's why Beethoven is so wonderful. You know, I mean, there's that whole classical tradition from especially Bach, you know, Bach, Mozart, Schubert, Schumann. My wife and I are working on some Schumann pieces right now. I play an old 18th century oboe. It's called the Baroque Oboe. Just two keys, 7 holes, but 2 keys. And so we're working on these little things, and they're a lot of fun to play. They're not that difficult. They're difficult.
And it's double reeded as well, right?
Yeah, and I have to make my own reeds, which is, for me, it's kind of fun. I like to do that kind of stuff with my hands, you know. So it's sort of fun to make the reeds. And now I've gotten to the point where I can actually make a reed that works pretty well. I still have a long ways to go to get to a professional level, but I'm doing pretty well.
But, you know, I think you're touching on something that's occurred to me as well, in the sense that I think one reason maybe we're not as creative as we are is because we don't quite own and understand the technology around us. Like, we don't have the ability to make things. Like, I mean, we can even make something as simple as a chair or a table. It's something you buy from IKEA. And if you can't even make something simple, why even imagine making something complex?
Yeah. Yeah. No, we're not a hands-on society anymore. We're a disposable society. I mean, I sometimes drive my wife crazy because I won't throw something out because I say, well, I could probably fix it later when I get time.
I know. I have a microwave and one of those outside umbrellas and a whole bunch of other things that are in a category of "we'll fix someday."
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've got that habit. I think that I think is part of male culture somehow. There's something about it. But anyway, but we have got to the point where kids don't think about that. I remember my younger brother, he could take anything apart and put it back together and make it work. And I was never that mechanically inclined, although I could fix stuff. I always learned how to fix stuff, and I still do. But my younger brother was better at it than I was. But I think it is sort of a male characteristic to get in and do the work because we don't mind getting dirty. Of course, nowadays you work in a clean room, you're working hard, but you don't get dirty.
Don't get dirty. That's true.
Yeah, like your guy that's going to go up to Blue Origin. I don't think he'll be having to worry about his fingernails getting too dirty.
Yeah, maybe not. And he's going to be a project manager. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a pretty good first step into something like that.
He used to work in the oil and gas industry, working on some huge projects there as a project manager. So he has the experience to work on complex, big industrial projects and lots of moving parts.
That's exciting. That's very good. That's very
It's
good.
just interesting how secretive Blue Origin is. There's a joke about Elon Musk is like celebrating and what have you, talking about landing this colony on the moon. And then whenever they arrive there, Jeff Bezos is already there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't think he can keep that secret. But yeah, well, it's this whole proprietary thing. That's why one of the things I really appreciated about what Ms. Majid said was that, collaboration, not competition. That's how you get something done. You collaborate with others. And, the society of greed, I don't know if you're old enough to remember Michael Milken and the gang of the 1980s. Their motto was, greed is good.
Mm-hmm.
Which means, if you can steal somebody's idea and use it for your benefit, that's good. And so that, to me, that's really degraded. That is, a really degraded view of social relations.
I mean, it makes you doubt everybody and keeps you from collaborating. And, you just become a bandit of thieves instead of, people that are creating together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I tell you, we've gone a long way downhill since Nixon pulled the plug on the dollar back in '71. What Kennedy did gave us a really big push forward, but then they killed him and nobody did anything about it. I mean, people knew that the Warren Commission report was just a big, huge cover up, but nobody ever did anything. No political leaders stood up and fight. They didn't fight. And it's that's a problem. So we're in a position now. We've got a guy, for all of his what faults or whatever, he's got the guts to fight. And people should be saying, my God, how can we get him to do the full program? Don't wait till he's kicked out or shot or something. Let's get it done now. Get him to do it. He's got the fighting spirit. We haven't had a president like that in my lifetime. except Kennedy. I mean, I did have Kennedy. But after that, we have had nobody that's really had a fighting spirit. So that's kind of where I am. And by the way, my wife is probably fixing supper, and I should probably get off here.
Oh, one last question then. If
Yeah.
it was safe and affordable, would you have an interest in going in space?
I would have absolutely no trouble. I would love to go to the moon. That would be so much fun. You know, I mean, just that picture that I can't remember your partner's, you know, put on the screen of a balloon going up.
Uh-huh.
That, I mean, to me, just the idea that they could actually do that is quite astounding to me. You know, because that balloon, the carriage going up must be about the size of a minivan, right? And that balloon has got to be the size of City Hall. You know,
I know.
you know, to get up that high, you know, I mean, it's got to have a huge amount of buoyancy, and the air is awful thin, 62 miles up. That, but to be able to do that safely, of course, I'd want to make sure it was safe. But oh, I'd love to do that. How about you?
I'm a little scared of heights, but I don't have any trouble being in like a little small Cessna airplane.
Yeah.
But I have to convince myself that the balloon is safe. You know,
Yeah.
hopefully they have parachutes or something as a backup.
Yeah.
You know, just in case you know, it goes pop or something.
Yeah, they have a parachute on the minivan.
Exactly. I wanna know I can survive it, but it looks promising. I mean, it looks like it could potentially be a lot safer than being on top of you know, several millions of pounds of rocket fuel.
Yeah, right. No, that's, well, you know, that's where this technology. I mean, have you ever heard of these, what do they call them? Catapult things? There's this idea that you could send a payload into low Earth orbit using evacuated tube and magnetically levitated, you know, propulsion. And, you know, it'd be long. And of course, on the moon, it would be easy to do that. But down here on Earth, you really have to have a big system. But you build this thing up along a mountain ledge. And I don't know how many miles it would have to be. It would probably have 4 or 5 miles long. And by the time it comes out of it, it's going at this incredible speed. And you can get up into low Earth orbit, according to the designers. So there are those kinds of things that are possible. But we could have been exploring that, but we haven't been. You know, we could have been, we haven't been. So, but anyway, that's on the agenda, right?
Yeah, I think something like that would get built on the moon first.
Yeah.
You know, to kind of get materials off into orbit or maybe back here, and then, you know, we could build a more powerful system here.
Yeah, well, I read a report that they're thinking there's a lot more metal on the moon than they thought originally down below. Somebody's come up with some analysis that shows there's a lot more metal than we had figured. So it may be that there's a heck of a lot more on the moon that we could use as resource. So got to get up there, figure it out.
Got to get up there. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
so
I got to go. So it's fun. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you again soon, hopefully in a month.
Sounds good. See you later,
Okay.
Peter.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, forget,
Yep.
Don't forget to post the flyer thing so people can get to our event if they so choose.
I'll definitely put it out there.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.